My name is Captain Jack Henderson, though most folks just call me Henderson. For 4 decades, I've called the Gulf of Mexico my home. Now, as I get ready to retire my captain's hat and step onto solid ground for good, I feel it's my duty to leave something behind. Not for my crew, no, most of them have their sea legs by now, but for the rookies who will follow. Rig 34 isn't a place for the reckless or the unprepared, and if my stories can prevent even one greenhorn from making a deadly mistake, then I'll consider this guide worth writing. I wasn't always a man of the sea. Long ago, I thought my future was destined for a quieter life. My father was a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands and built things to last. I inherited his talent for craftsmanship, but I wasn't drawn to making chairs or fixing roofs. I wanted something grander, something wilder. The Gulf called to me, as it does to a select few, and once I answered, I never looked back. I'm a simple man. I like my work steady, my coffee strong, and my boots well worn. I have no use for ties or crowded offices with flickering lights. I've always preferred the open air, the rhythmic sound of waves against steel, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'm part of something bigger than myself. Running an oil rig isn't glamorous work, but it's honest. It takes discipline, grit, and the resolve to face whatever the Gulf decides to throw your way. And believe me, she has her moods. I've spent most of my life out here, watching the sun rise and set over endless water. The routines of the rig suit me. There's comfort in the predictability of a shift, the rhythm of maintenance checks, and the hum of generators. But there's another side to it, too. The isolation can take a toll on a man, and the silence can grow heavy. You've got to learn to carry it without letting it crush you. Not everyone can. Now, about Rig 34. It's a behemoth, a floating metal island off the coast of Texas. Officially, we're in the Gulf, though our precise location shifts with the currents and the company's directives. The rig has faced its fair share of storms, and she's withstood them all. She's built for it. The men and women who work here. Some of them are, too. Others, not so much. The crew changes often. Some stay for a few months, others for just a few weeks. Turnover is high, but that's to be expected. Life out here isn't for everyone. The work is grueling, the weather unpredictable, and the Gulf, she's as mesmerizing as she is unforgiving. You do well to remember that. When you arrive, you'll be handed a silver pin. It's small, round, and etched with an image that resembles a sea monster. You're to wear it at all times, no exceptions. Most rookies don't think much of it. They assume it's some sort of company tradition or a way to identify workers in an emergency. That's partly true, but there's more to it than that. You'll find out soon enough. The rig operates under peculiar circumstances. For one, none of us truly knows who owns it. Sure, there's a name on the paycheck, but it's vague, Gulf Shore Energy, just another faceless holding company. Before you start, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement. Standard stuff, but the rules that follow? They aren't written down. You'll learn them from the veterans, piece by piece, until they become second nature. That's why I'm writing this guide, to fill in the gaps and tell you the things that don't make it into the official safety manuals. This isn't a place for careless mistakes. People have been lost out here, some to the waves, others to, well, things we don't talk about. There are forces at work in the Gulf that defy logic and reason. I've witnessed things I can't explain, and I've heard stories from men I trust that would make your hair stand on end. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before I dive into all that, let's take it slow. You're new here, after all. Take it one step at a time, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find your footing. Life on the rig is tough, but it's honest work. There's something satisfying about it, though most people wouldn't understand. Out here, you live by routine. You wake up at the same time every day, put on your gear, and get to work. Some days, you're in the engine room checking gauges and making sure nothing's about to blow. Other days, you're up top, tightening bolts or clearing debris from the platform. It's hard, physical work, and by the end of the day, your muscles ache and your clothes reek of salt and oil. But there's a sense of accomplishment in it that you won't find anywhere else. The food helps, too. I've been on rigs where the cafeteria serves gray slop that could pass for dog food, but not here. On Rig 34, the meals are hot, and the coffee actually tastes decent. The beans come from Colombia. I don't know who's footing the bill for that luxury, but I'm not complaining. Every morning, there's bacon. Crispy, greasy, the kind that makes your mouth water before you've even stepped in line. Barbecue Fridays are a highlight, and they don't skimp on the portions either. It's the small things like that that keep morale up. Out here, you learn to appreciate the little things. The sunsets are another blessing. No matter how rough the day has been, when the sun dips below the horizon and paints the sky with streaks of orange and pink, you can't help but pause and take it in. The Gulf transforms into a shimmering sheet of gold, and for a moment, the rig doesn't feel so cold and industrial. It feels alive. Now, the rig itself is noisy. It's a constant drone of generators, the clang of metal against metal, and the occasional hiss of steam. At first, it can drive you mad, especially when you're trying to sleep. Most of us wear earplugs to block it out, but after a while, you stop noticing it. The noise becomes part of the background, like the ticking of a clock or the hum of a refrigerator. You don't realize it's there until it's gone. But you didn't come here to read about barbecue or sunsets, did you? You're here for the stories, and I've got plenty of them. Some might sound unbelievable. Hell, if I hadn't seen them with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe them either. But they matter, and if you're wise, you'll keep them in mind. Out here, the Gulf doesn't just take, she challenges you. And sometimes, she reveals things you'd rather not witness. Let's start small. The fish. Every so often, a fish will turn up on the rig platform. At first glance, they appear ordinary. Black scales, streamlined bodies, the kind you'd find in any fishing port. But trust me, you should leave them alone. Don't touch them, and definitely don't keep them as a trophy. If you catch one in your nets, toss it back into the water immediately. I can't stress this enough. These fish aren't normal. Not even close. They look fine on the outside, but if you're curious, or foolish, enough to open their mouths, you'll see something you'll never forget. Teeth. Not sharp, jagged teeth like a shark or piranha. No, these fish have human teeth. Straight, slightly yellow, but unmistakably human. I've seen plenty of strange things in my time, but those teeth, they send a chill down my spine. One rookie thought it was funny to keep one. "Check this out," he said, holding it up like it was some kind of prize. We warned him to toss it back, but he just laughed it off. Later that night, we heard him screaming. When we found him, he was curled up in the corner of his quarters, babbling nonsense and clutching his arm as if it were on fire. He didn't stay long after that. No one ever does. Then there are the salt statues. They only appear after a storm. I'm not talking about a light drizzle, I mean the kind of storm where waves crash against the rig, threatening to pull it under. On nights like that, everyone stays inside. You don't step onto the platform unless you've got a death wish. The wind screams, the rain pounds, and the entire rig trembles under the force of it. It's a humbling reminder of how small we are out here, just a tiny speck of metal in the vast, furious Gulf. But when the storm clears and the waters settle, that's when you'll see them. The salt statues. They don't always appear in the same spot, but they're always there. Figures made entirely of salt, standing on the platform as if sculpted by the waves themselves. At first, you might think it's an illusion, or perhaps just some bizarre erosion. But then you'll notice the details. Arms, legs, torsos, and faces. Human faces. It's the expressions that get to you. They're incredibly detailed, down to the creases in the skin and the wrinkles around their eyes. But it's their mouths that haunt you. They're always open, as if frozen mid-scream. Some statues have their hands outstretched, reaching for something or someone. It's like they were caught in their final moments, whatever those moments were. We don't touch them. We don't speak of them. By noon, they're usually gone, melted back into the Gulf or scattered by the wind. But they always return, after the next storm or the one after that. I've asked myself 100 times where they come from, but I've never found an answer. Maybe it's best that way. So, if you're on the platform one morning after a storm and you see one, don't mess with it. Take it as a warning, a reminder of the Gulf's power. She gives, she takes, and sometimes, she leaves you things best left alone. That's enough for now. There's plenty more to share, but you'll need time to process this. Life on the rig might seem routine at first, but it doesn't take long for the strange and the inexplicable to find you. And when it does, you'd better be prepared. The Gulf is full of oddities, some I'll never understand. I don't have explanations for all of it, hell, most of it, but I've seen enough to know this: the less you interfere, the safer you'll be. I'm writing this down because the rookies need to know. You're coming to a place where the rules of the world don't always seem to apply. The Gulf has existed since time immemorial, and there's more to it than we can ever hope to comprehend. There are nights when the water looks like liquid ink. No light pierces it, and it stretches out like a vast, endless pool of darkness. But then, just when you think it couldn't get darker, something catches your eye: stars. Tiny specks of light shimmering on the surface, reflecting back at you like a second sky. It's breathtaking, sure, but it doesn't make sense. When you're miles from shore with nothing but the rig's lights to break the darkness, you learn to question beauty like that. One of the most terrifying nights of my life happened when I was still new to the rig. It was 40 years ago, back when I was young, eager, and maybe a little too bold for my own good. I'd just finished my shift and decided to head up to the observation deck for a smoke. It was a calm night, or so I thought. The air was thick with the promise of a storm, and the clouds overhead were dense enough to block out every trace of moonlight or stars. I leaned against the railing, lit my cigarette, and took a long drag. The Gulf was as black as I'd ever seen it, but after a while, I noticed something unusual. There were tiny specks of light scattered across the water beneath me. At first, I figured they were reflections from the rig's lights, but something didn't add up. They didn't dance with the waves the way reflections should. They stayed put, unmoving, like stars pinned to a black canvas. I stared at them, transfixed, until a chilling realization crept over me. The sky above was completely blanketed in storm clouds. There weren't any stars to reflect. That's when it hit me: they weren't stars at all. They were eyes. Dozens of them, maybe more, all gazing up at me from the depths. My stomach turned, and my cigarette slipped from my fingers. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of my boots pounding against the steel as I bolted back inside. It took me months before I could step out onto the deck at night again. Even now, after all these years, I avoid looking at the water too long. You never know what's staring back. That wasn't the last strange thing I've encountered out here. Not even close. The Gulf has a way of showing you things that stay with you, no matter how much you try to forget. One thing I can't shake is the ship. Every man on this rig knows about it, even if they don't talk about it. It only appears on stormy nights. You'll be out on the platform, battling to secure the equipment or ensuring everything's holding steady, and then you'll spot it, a colossal ship looming in the distance. It looks like it sailed straight out of a history book, with towering, tattered sails and a wooden hull so encrusted with barnacles it's hard to tell where the wood ends and the sea begins. The thing glides across the water like a ghost, silent and effortless, no matter how turbulent the waves are. And you never see anyone aboard. Not a single soul. The first time I saw it, I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe I'd spent too much time in the sun, or maybe the stress of the storm was messing with my head. But when I glanced at the men beside me, I saw the same stunned look on their faces. They saw it too. We didn't speak a word. No one ever does. But we all think the same thing: that's Davy Jones. You've probably heard the legend, but if you haven't, let me fill you in. They say he's the captain of the Flying Dutchman, doomed to sail the seas for eternity. Some tales say he was a greedy sailor who betrayed his crew for riches. Others claim he fell in love with the sea itself and made a pact with the devil to stay on it forever. No matter which version you believe, the story always ends the same: Davy Jones is cursed, and so is anyone who crosses his path. Sailors have feared him for generations. They say he collects the souls of those who perish at sea, dragging them down to his locker at the ocean's bottom. When you're out here, surrounded by nothing but water, those old legends start to feel a little too real. They're the kind of stories that keep you alive. So, when that ship drifts by, you don't call out to it. You don't wave, and you sure as hell don't try to signal it. You keep your head down, do your job, and hope it continues on its way. It always does. There's one rule on Rig 34 that you need to take more seriously than any other: never go through the red basement door. You might never even come across it during your time here. It's not always there, but when it is, you'll know. It's a heavy, rust-red door, tucked away at the farthest end of the rig's lower levels, near the storage stairs. You could pass by that spot 100 times and never see it, but then one day, it'll just be there. No one knows why. No one knows who put it there or why it disappears and reappears as it pleases. If you see it, do yourself a favor, turn around and walk away. Don't touch the handle. Don't even stand there too long staring at it. The longer you linger, the more tempting it becomes, and curiosity on Rig 34 is the kind of thing that gets you killed. The last person who ignored that warning didn't live to regret it. His name was Mark. He was a welder, a good guy, always cracking jokes and quick to lend a hand. He'd been on the rig for about 6 months when he stumbled upon the door. I don't know what compelled him to open it, but he did. He didn't tell anyone, he just slipped inside during his shift and never came back. We searched every inch of the rig, tore it apart looking for him, but he was gone. Weeks later, during a storm, his body washed up onto the platform. That was the first and only time I've ever seen something like that happen. The Gulf doesn't give back what it takes, not usually. But there he was, sprawled on the platform, cold as the steel beneath him. I didn't always stick to the rules myself. When I was younger and new, I had a rebellious streak in me. I didn't like being told what I could and couldn't do, especially when no one would give me a straight answer. So, one night, when the door appeared during my shift, I decided to find out for myself what lay beyond it. It was reckless. I knew it even as I turned the handle and stepped inside. The door was heavy, groaning on its hinges as it swung open. Beyond it was a metal staircase spiraling downward, descending far deeper than I ever expected. The air grew colder with every step I took, and the hum of the rig's machinery faded into a distant murmur. When I finally reached the bottom, I found myself in a narrow, eerie chamber. The walls were made of steel, slick with condensation, and the floor felt uneven, warped as if the pressure from the surrounding water had twisted it. The entire room was submerged, with a massive, circular window dominating one wall. Through that window, I could see the ocean, dark, boundless, and endless. There were no other doors, no clear purpose for the room. Just the red door behind me and that vast window staring out into the depths. I didn't linger. The longer I stood there, the stronger the feeling grew that I didn't belong. I hurried back up the stairs, shut the door behind me, and never looked back. The next day, the door was gone. I've only come across it a handful of times since then, and each time, I make sure to steer clear. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed longer, or worse, if the door had vanished while I was still inside. That's the thing about it, you can't trust it to stay put. It appears and disappears on its own terms, and you don't want to be caught on the wrong side when it does. I have no idea why the door exists. I don't know who built that room or what it's meant for. Maybe it's a leftover relic from the rig's original design, a forgotten feature from a time when people asked fewer questions. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something that doesn't belong in our world. Whatever it is, it's not for us to understand. All we can do is stay away. If you ever come across it during your time here, remember this: don't go inside. Walk away. Then there's the captain's room. No, not mine. It belonged to the captain before me. It's been empty for years now, and no one dares enter. It's not locked, you could step inside if you wanted to, but no one ever does. It's a comfortable space, too, larger than the standard quarters, with a sturdy desk, a window overlooking the Gulf, and a bed that's leagues better than any bunk on the rig. But it's been left untouched, preserved like a museum exhibit sealed off from the rest of the rig. The old captain disappeared. Just like that. One day, he was here, running the rig as usual, and the next, he was gone. No warning, no farewell, no signs of a struggle. He just vanished. The crew searched every inch of the rig, but they didn't find a single trace of him. That was decades ago. His disappearance remains one of Rig 34's greatest mysteries. I've asked the old-timers, tried to piece together what little they remember, but no one knows, or if they do, they aren't talking. All they'll tell me is that he was a good man, a fair and hard-working captain who earned the respect of his crew. Then, one day, he simply wasn't there anymore. The room stays empty now, not out of fear, but out of respect. At least, that's what the crew says. But here's the strangest part: on calm nights, when the Gulf is still and the rig is silent, some of the men swear they've seen a figure standing on the observation deck. He's always in the same spot, leaning against the railing, cigarette in hand. If you get close enough, you'll see he wears a silver pin, the same kind every worker here gets when they sign on. When I first heard about him, I figured it was just another ghost story to scare the newcomers. But then I saw him for myself. It was one of those quiet nights, the kind where the Gulf looks like glass and the stars stretch endlessly. I went up to the observation deck for a smoke, like I always do after my shift. At first, I thought I was alone, but then I noticed him, a man in a yellow jacket, his back turned to me, staring out over the water. I don't know why, but I nodded to him and said, "Good evening." He turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the outline of his face in the dim light. He didn't speak, just nodded back and took another drag from his cigarette. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do, and then I walked away. I stayed off the deck for 3 nights after that. That's the rule. If you see him, acknowledge him, be polite, but don't linger. And whatever you do, don't return to the deck for a few days. The crew believes it's safer that way. Some think the man in the yellow jacket is the old captain, still watching over the rig in his own way. Others believe he's something else, something the Gulf sends to remind us of our place. Whatever he is, people sometimes disappear after seeing him. Not often, but often enough. There's Mark, the welder who vanished after the red door. Before him, there was a deckhand named Vince who ignored the 3-day rule. He returned to the observation deck the following night, and by morning, he was gone. No one knows what happens to them. I've taken to leaving a cup of coffee on the deck whenever I see him. It's nothing special, just the regular brew from the cafeteria, but it feels like the right thing to do. My parents weren't particularly religious, but they always taught me to show respect for things beyond my understanding. The coffee is my way of doing that, a kind of offering, I suppose. I don't know if he drinks it. By the time I check, the cup is always empty, but that could just be the wind or sea spray. Still, it gives me a sense of peace. I've only encountered him a handful of times over the years, and each time, it's the same. He doesn't talk, doesn't move much, just stands there with his cigarette, staring out at the water like he's waiting. For what? I don't know. If you're smart, you'll follow the rules. If you see him, give him a nod, say good evening, maybe ask a question if you're feeling bold. He won't respond, but that's not what matters. What matters is showing respect. After all, if it really is the old captain, he's earned that much. That's all I have to say about the man in the yellow jacket. You'll have to make up your own mind about him. Finally, let's talk about the badges. Every crew member on Rig 34 is issued one upon arrival. It's roughly the size of a silver dollar, crafted from a polished metal that never tarnishes, no matter how many storms you endure. On the front, there's an engraving of a kraken entwined around an anchor, with the company's logo etched in such a way that it catches the light. Officially, the badges are just identification. They allow you to clock in and out and grant access to various areas of the rig. But like most things out here, they have more significance than meets the eye. The badges are also keys. Certain badges unlock doors that aren't listed on any blueprint, doors hidden in the lower levels where the rig stretches deep below the waterline. These are not your typical maintenance rooms or storage closets. No one speaks about what's behind those doors, and I don't think anyone really wants to know. There's something unsettling about them, even just walking past. Then there's what lurks beneath the rig. We don't know what it is, only that it's massive. Larger than the rig itself. It's not aggressive, not yet, anyway, but it's there. Sometimes, when the rig groans, it's hard to tell if it's the machinery under strain or if it's that thing in the depths making a low, resonant sound. Whatever it is, you don't want to get too close to it. And you certainly don't want it noticing you. That's why we wear the badges. They offer protection. At least, that's what we tell ourselves. But the badges do more than protect us from whatever's down there. They also serve as a lifeline. If you ever find yourself thrown overboard during a storm, and trust me, you never want to end up in that water, the badge is your only shot at survival. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, you won't forget it. I've witnessed it just once, about 10 years back. It was during one of the fiercest storms I've ever endured. The waves were colossal, hammering the rig with enough force to make it tremble. The wind was deafening, and the rain poured down so hard you could barely see your own hand. We were all strapped in, struggling to keep the equipment stable, when one of the rookies lost his footing. He went over the railing, and just like that, he was in the water. The waves tossed him around like a rag doll. We yelled, threw ropes, tried everything we could, but the current was too strong. Then, as we watched in horror, those dozen eyes I mentioned earlier surfaced. They dotted the water's surface. And then, from the depths, something else rose, a mouth. It was enormous, as wide as half the rig, and circular. It wasn't filled with razor-sharp teeth like you'd expect from a sea monster. These were human teeth. Rows upon rows of them, straight and yellowed, just like the fish we occasionally find washed up on the platform. The mouth started to suck in water, creating a whirlpool that pulled everything toward it. The rookie was as good as gone. We could see it in his face as he fought against the pull, his screams lost in the roar of the storm. He clutched his badge tightly, and that's when it happened. The badge began to emit a glow, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. Out of nowhere, a kelpie emerged. It rose from the water like something from a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, depending on how you see it. It resembled a horse, but its mane was made of seaweed, and its eyes glowed with an eerie light. The rookie didn't think twice. He latched onto the kelpie's neck and clung on for dear life as it struggled against the whirlpool's pull. The kelpie's strength was incredible, and it managed to break free, carrying him back toward the rig. We were there, hands outstretched, and when the kelpie brought him close enough, we hauled him onto the platform. The kelpie didn't linger. As soon as the rookie was safe, it slipped beneath the waves, disappearing along with the kraken and its terrifying maw. The storm settled soon after, as if whatever force had been stirred was now satisfied and retreating into the abyss. That's the only time I've witnessed something like that, but it's far from the only tale. Some of the crew whisper that you can toss your badge into the water and make a plea for help. If whatever dwells down there takes a liking to you, it might respond. But there's no guarantee what you'll get, or if you'll get anything at all. It's a gamble, and not one I'd advise taking lightly. What I do know is this: losing your badge is not an option. Keep it with you. Wear it at all times. It's more than just a piece of metal stamped with a company logo. It's your shield, your tether, your only connection to the unknown forces keeping this rig afloat. Out here, with the gulf stretching endlessly in every direction, sometimes that's the only thing standing between you and oblivion. That's the last story I'll share. If you're reading this, you're probably already aboard the rig, settling into your quarters, getting used to the constant hum of machinery and the sharp tang of salt in the air. Maybe you'll never see the red door, the man in the yellow jacket, or the Kelpie. Maybe your time here will be nothing but routine shifts, strong coffee, and barbecue Fridays. If that's the case, count yourself lucky. But if you do encounter these things, if you hear the low groan of something immense beneath you or catch sight of glowing eyes breaking the water's surface, remember what I've told you. The Gulf is beautiful, yes, but she's also vast, ancient, and filled with secrets we'll never truly grasp. Respect her, obey the rules, and keep your badge close. Good luck. Did you enjoy the story, friends? If you were a newcomer to the Rig 34 platform, which of Captain Jack Henderson's stories would you take as a mere tale and which would make you think seriously? Write your opinion and impressions of the story in the comments section. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, it helps its development a lot.